the mother tongue, which may be a dialect, is not available, and for whom English in this generation is the language of expression.
Yes.
Why do we ignore that generation and that kind of writing, and sometimes even ridicule or not accept that this may be the mother tongue of this generation?
Context of our country, I think Ramachandra Guha actually wrote recently an essay, Where Are the Bilingual Intellectuals Gone? You see, so the bilingualism, in the sense, the kind of English we speak itself carries the markers of the other languages. You see, so we are producing a generation who have neither English nor proficiency in Indian languages. Indian languages are in your vicinity. So if you do not really establish a certain proficiency in one of them or more than one of them, you also stand to lose a certain dimension of your experience, inner experience. I am actually not, you see, and this is increasingly becoming a major, you see, in globalized world, you can very well live in your entire life, intellectual, emotional, everything in English, you see, or French, or any of the world languages. But that also creates a question, you see, what kind of, you see, subject is that, which actually is, you see, that's where this question is not one of purity or returning to a pristine pre-colonial, you see, it's a question of claiming a part of your own self, you see, a part of your own inner.
It also becomes a part of yourself because it's part of your colonized self, isn't it?
Which
the fact that English is your mother tongue, because it is part of your colonized self, isn't it? Or part of your having an inter-linguistic
and in any case, the English we speak is pretty different from that spoken in England, as I noticed very much this time. So ours is a kind of hybrid English. I think it's richer than English in England, perhaps. And yeah, good news. It's richer in a sense. It's culturally richer, and actually they like it there. Right? That's what I discovered. and I don't see why one can't use that as an optic with which to look at issues in India. Oh dear, we're an Englishman now.
No. My main thought is that at any one moment there are 3 generations of adult people alive. That means, I presume, you're the youngest generation of the adults in your family and your vicinity, and it seems to me to be extremely important that we keep the solidarity, keep the contacts between people of student age, their parents and their grandparents. And I'm quite sure this is an African thing. I don't know it so well in India, that the contact with grandparents is often going to have to be over even an imperfectly spoken local language. So I'd like to say that. Now I'd like to say about learning a second language, because I did start working on German when I was 35, so I wasn't able to do it when I was at this young age where you learn languages fairly successfully, fairly quickly. And I do think that having the objective of speaking a language eloquently, a new language eloquently and wittily, is very important. And over the years, I think my German has improved because I keep on with that. So that's really the recommendation about your colonialized language. Leave it behind gradually and make it your own.
You know, Zubaydah, the question you're raising is a slightly complicated one.
Yes.
If your children want to speak English, that's a choice. And I'm sure nothing should come in the way of the choice. Okay? Nobody should be in a position to say this is bad. It's their choice, they do it. But that choice includes abandoning a language that you speak as the mother, that your community speaks. Now, why do these children arrive at this point of abandoning a language which has come to them naturally? Why do they want to pick up a language as their own, into which they are not born? We have to address these questions as well. Now, hypothetically, if your children feel that their experience is best represented in English, if they make that kind of an informed, intelligent cultural choice, that's wonderful. But what really happens in most cases is that people choose English because that represents in India power, prestige, money. It's much more fashionable to be heard speaking English, quote and unquote, if you can call it English, than a Mapra language. I am worried about that, right? At the end of the day, of course, you choose your language, you're welcome to it, but the choice also includes abandoning a language into which you are born. And I think that raises very, very disturbing questions. We have this in Bangalore, for example. If you look at the way the Kannada is spoken in Bangalore, except primary verbs, adjectives and nouns and all other words are in English.
But
Right?
that is the nature of language. Language lends itself to such things.
I am very sure linguistics has other explanations for it. We simply can't say that's it, most people do it. Bangalore people do not represent most people, They don't, definitely not.
They represent themselves.
But also, it's true that increasingly we have English vocabulary encroaching into Kannada. That's a fact. I'm not saying that you need to have some sort of a cultural filter, a sieve, which will catch all the English words and throw them out and retain some pristine Kannada. That's not possible. I don't even say that.
There is a similar.
There is this cultural question that is involved, and I need you to be sensitive about it. Sensitive to it. Yeah.
There is a similar phenomenon I have read about that English is permeating European languages, particularly German. There were jokes circulating on the internet with regard to how German spelling has been anglicized. Or rather, was it the reverse? English spelling has been Germanized. But at the same time, there were also anecdotes circulating which said that Germans are using more and more English in their day-to-day conversation. So isn't it a kind of universal phenomenon?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I think the French are the only people who have a national institute that looks into the purity of language.
I'm not talking of French, I'm talking of German.
I don't know about German. Foucault, for all his radicalism, was very disturbed by the number of English words that were encroaching into French. He was, in one of his dialogues, he was very angry about the word weekend being used in French. We are not doing that.
And wasn't it David Lodge also?
Pardon?
Wasn't it David Lodge also who recently talked about, not very recently, maybe some 2-3 years ago, he talked about the kind of contributions that English has, Indianisms have made.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Udupi Hotel is in Oxford English
And
Dictionary.
so is
now.
IU was the latest.
Hallelujah.
We'll have the Queen sing IU.
If it is in Oxford English Dictionary, it is English then.
Shouldn't we be moving towards a more global, local, rather than becoming more and more parochial?
Geraldine,
And
the
clinging on to our
thing
regional
is, when we say we need to move, who does this we represent?
Indeed.
That's the problem.
Indeed.
I'm sorry to say, I'm not proud of it, but I'm badly monopoly.
I would simply like to plead for a multidimensional approach to this.
Yep.
You've tended to stress the cultural. In my experience with young people, with children in school, they will go the way that their friends are going. They will take that language on. I think that the spread of different languages in different settings is very common in history, and it takes the French to fight against it. But let's have a multidimensional discussion about this rather than a unidimensional.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think there was a...
Jennifer wants.
I should have said ladies first.
Speaking country, I would like to say that, in the first place, one of the things my husband and I noticed when we come to India is that the English used in India, as you said, is richer in many ways than what is in common use in Britain. The vocabulary in an ordinary daily paper is it's not words we don't know, but it's words we certainly don't use habitually. So that it's a great relief to see that English is being in some ways kept alive in India.
Alive, livened, chutnified, it's nice.
But this is also, I mean, the downside of English as an international language is that the English that's being used, for example, in the world of science, which is what I know best, is a kind of averaged out, sort of average of British, American and all the others, and it's being reduced to its lowest common denominator, which is one of the things that English departments need to fight against. And the other thing is that English has become very much a tool. You were asking why people want to work in English. In Switzerland, the education system is going over to teaching English earlier and earlier. And we get the impression that most people are learning English because it's a useful tool for their career.
Yeah.
It was a great joy to discover a friend of ours who, on retirement, wanted to learn his English again so he could read English literature. We realised that's unusual. Mostly, our language is becoming a working tool. It's necessary to have tools, but it's pity it has to be the only one.
I do appreciate what I was referring to is the question of cultural power. Increasingly, there is a world which is being alienated. The words I know, my children do not know. The words that were commonly used in 1920s are just going up. Maybe that's the logic of the whole thing. You know, in Europe, I think a language like Yiddish is no more.
Only for
It's
specialists.
a
Yes,
small-
only for specialists.
It's a language spoken by the Jews.
Yes.
Of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, it's no more, I think.
Or scarcely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Languages are dying. Maybe an inexorable logic. We don't know about that. But that still leaves me with this feeling, you know, that we are losing something. I'm not suggesting, you might think that I'm suggesting that we need to do some preservative work here. No, that's not what I'm saying. The thing is, here is a thing about which we need to talk. We need to talk about it. English is not just a language, a neutral language. In India, it represents power. It comes to us like a bulldozer. Runs over all of us, flattening everything. It represents a power about which we are powerless, actually. It substitutes our expression. It substitutes our language. You know, I need to think in English. Look at this. James Mill was very right when he said, you cannot rule an empire with guns. Educate them in English, and then even after the Union Jack is lowered, you will have millions of brown-skinned English gentlemen. I think he hit on the nail very well.
But sir, politically, in India, aren't we moving further and further away from the English-educated elite in all the political circles to the more, vernacular medium types? Aren't we today?
No, I don't
Is
think
there
so.
a shift in power in that sense?
Bihar wanted to do away with English, it is coming back to English. In Uttar Pradesh, they did away with English as a compulsory language in competitive examinations, they have come back to it. And because of the information technology and the success of Infosys, English is back with a vengeance.
I think what's happening is there's probably a divide wherein we have our colleges, getting democratized in a certain sense with first generation or maybe second generation learners from the lower classes or castes and so on. But at the same time, who are the ones who are getting into the positions of power? The best bureaucratic and other positions. But I was also thinking, besides this particular factor, what about the middle class which has moved out? And what happens to their children and their languages?
Moved out where, ma'am?
Moved out maybe to the cities.
Okay.
Intercaste marriages, where children are spoken to in English rather than in the mother tongue or the father tongue. Maybe migrated to USA, UK, Europe, etc. Yeah. And what about the children there? What are the languages they will speak? What is the cultural or linguistic heritage they will have? These are all questions which are already there,
yes,
because I can see them in some of my neighbors' children and grandchildren.
The students should speak. They've been so quiet.
They are speaking among themselves. Please speak to us.
Nobody asked them this sense of English, which means that only one form of English is available to us, which we then, try to get inspired by, etc., try to emulate and all that. Whereas when we are tuned to our regional languages or bhashas, we have a store of dialects. But there also there is a tendency for these dialects to get standardized. In fact, the Bashir's text that Professor Ramakrishnan mentioned, there Bashir actually talks about the incursions of modernity into people's lives, especially educated people's lives, where one character coaches the other character who speaks the Mappila dialect, how to speak the standard form of Malayalam. In Balyakala Sakhi, I think this happens, or in Indo-Perfect one of these texts you have, which means that people who speak dialects within regional sectors are being asked to speak the standardized form of the language. And everywhere there is a general kind of standardization which is happening in relation to language. So as a result of which we are losing out on dialect varieties.
What about Pygmalion? In that.
Just one comment. A related issue. Because English commands this kind of a great cultural and commercial power, it's very easy to actually promote a very regressive kind of ideology in India. Recently there was a think tank which has suggested that English should be banned from the higher education throughout India. Now there is a policy making body, already they are circulating, and so the presence of English educated elite living in Gujarat, I have actually known. You see, this is the most vulnerable is a kind of a group. The English newspaper journalists or teachers or certain kind of so-called intellectuals, they become very vulnerable because they can be targeted. So the English in that sense is not a language in India. That's what Shashidhar is saying. English is a marker of several things: power, commercial power, and also what you call a kind of secular worldview. You see, there is a secular modern, as I said. Actually, there is a secular modern within Malayalam or Kannada. Or my argument has been, you need to recover the secular modern in the Indian regional languages in order to resist the revivalist and other predatory ideologies. You see, we cannot do it through English. We need to actually even learn Sanskrit. The only person who actually very strongly opposed communalism in Kerala was a great Sanskrit scholar who said none of what you say about Sanskrit is true. And he said, I know more Sanskrit than many of you. So you need to actually know Sanskrit, you need to know Prakrit, you need to know your authentic or whatever, quote unquote, all those things. Amongst, you see, our younger generation, we need scholars of different kind. This is the point I've been making throughout. We need to recover several kinds of histories.
Yes.
Only then Otherwise, we are going to actually enter a dark tunnel where some people are going to dictate, this is your history, this is your past, this is what you actually need to do. So that prescriptive model can be resisted only through a recovery of the as I have been saying, the multilingual kind of the past.
And I think institutionally we are reaffirming this prescriptive model.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't accommodate these knowledges that are, not acceptable to this. So, I mean, that is, I think, the dilemma for a teacher. Who is, who is located within the institution. How do we handle that?
Do you mean knowledges or do you mean varieties of language, dialects of language?
I would say they're both part of each other. Yes, yes. So we have a private research or personal research, which in a sense is outside the institution, and then we have the institutional.
Classroom.
Yes. So there's always this dichotomy, the schizophrenia.
But is there a standardized English anywhere?
No, I'm not thinking of standardized English.
No, because you spoke about, ma'am spoke about a standardization, am I right? Did I misunderstand?
No, I'm sure even within the institutional framework, we expect a certain kind of
what's called an Indian way to
English to
Please
come
go.
to us
Please go.
through our students, through the scripts, etc.
We
And
mark
I
them
don't
on the
think
basis of
highly
that.
There's a
idealized
question,
forms
there's-
will be welcome to the English teacher.
Please go.
Except when you're doing creative writing where it's
Yeah.
welcome. Strangely enough, there's a
Please go.
kind of ambiguity.
It's okay.
Yeah, one page for and another for yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, in your keynote address yesterday, so you were saying Enlightenment ideas coming to India through Persian in English. Of course, you also explained it a little bit with Raja Ram Mohan Roy, English, Persian scholars. A little more elaboration on that, in the sense how this happened. That is one. And secondly, whenever we discuss post-colonialism, we also discuss modernity, modernism, 19th century modernism we discussed. How do we link these two words, post-colonialism and post-modernism? Post-modernism also being a part of our discourse in academic circles. So how do these two words or concepts or notions correlate, post-colonialism and post-modernism?
Should I? Yeah, please, you carry on. That was first question was for you.
In fact, there is an essay on multilingualism which I have written, it appearing in a Routledge volume very recently. So there I have discussed, you see, we have had a whole set of bilingual, trilingual kind of writers. You see, most of the Bhakti poets wrote in more than one language. You see, you have Mira, Namdev, you see, you have a whole lot of. So this legacy, what happened was the rise of Indian languages in the last millennium. You look at AD 1000 to AD 1500, AD 1600, most of the Indian languages suddenly emerged as very strong regional languages. They have been in the making for some time, but what accounts for this tremendous internal churning and and very often it's a text which actually emerges, very often a translation which makes these Indian languages a very independent. Jnaneshwari in Marathi, you will find similar kind of text. So this happens when Sanskrit is in decline and Persian, Arabic are already actually in the vicinity of Indian languages. And there have been a lot of dialogues between Persian scholars and Sanskrit scholars. And Persian actually was the language of administration, and even today you'll find a lot of such words in circulation, in administrative vocabulary. So it was only toward the end of 17th century that this position began shifting. You see, that's where you find English replacing particularly Persian and Arabic. And we very often think Persian, Arabic, they are administrative languages, they are intellectual languages. They have a long history of actually knowledge production, dissemination, etc. You see, how did Dryden write play on Aurangzeb? You see, this was written on the basis of a French scholar who visited India, and in his travelogue he actually describes the life of Aurangzeb. And this gets translated into English, and from there Dryden takes the story of Aurangzeb. So we perhaps, there is this historian Subramanian, he knows maybe 5 or 6 languages. He has been actually talking about how we have not looked at archives of the Indian languages lying outside their political territory. These languages have, when Vasco da Gama came to Kerala, there was a translator, he was a Gujarati. You see, how did that man actually know Malayalam as well as Portuguese? So definitely there was, trading communities along this is what Sanjay Subramaniam says, trading communities commanded a whole lot of knowledge of languages. Ganeri, Jonathan Ganeri, he has an entire book, I quoted from, he actually says how Enlightenment idea, some of the debates happening in Europe reached through Persian to India. It reached Benares, and some of this actually percolated among the scholars, reached Calcutta. So that is, in that context, I said, the Enlightenment ideas about rationality or many other things have had other roots. So we need to actually know that Indian languages also have been, in Malayalam, there are a lot of Portuguese words, lot of Dutch words, Arabic words. So if you suppress, standard Malayalam very often will suppress some of them. That's one reason why dialect is not exactly what you call a dialect. It may be, words whichever there is a history. There is a history behind every word. So this is what I actually meant, and this is also a postmodern kind of a situation.
The small addition to what you were saying. The British established colleges in India in the 19th century. The kind of education we have is therefore hardly 150 years old. What was education before this? We have forgotten that part. The role Persian played, for example, look at William Jones. We credit William Jones with the idea that he discovered the commonality between Greek, Latin and Sanskrit based solely on philology. He took certain words and showed that etymologically they are very nearer. What we do not know is this work had already been done in Persian in the 16th century, and this was taught to William Jones by his Persian translator plus tutor. William Jones doesn't acknowledge it. This work had already been done. Not only that, in the Persian administration of the Mughals, a lot of Indian texts had been translated into Persian, including Upanishad. And the title they give to Upanishads is very interesting. They call it Aupanikhat. Khat is letter in Urdu and about Arabic. Khat, They call it Aupanikhat. And in the translation, there is an appendage to the translation, which is a discussion. The discussion centers on this. Can idolaters be credited with philosophy? Are they capable of mental abstraction? And they say, look at this text. And this is a debate which can put to shame any of our secular debates. And this is lost to us. Our problem with post-colonialism is it hardly goes back farther than 19th century. You know, we don't know most of these things at all. The land legislation, we credit the British with land legislation, bringing in the riotwari system, the zamindari system. But most of these have been tried by Sher Khan. We don't know these things at all, you know. The way land records were kept in Persian, the land accounts were written. We are very familiar with the double entry method, but there were other methods of writing. You know, there's a letter called Modi. They used it and they kept very meticulous accounts. We have lost all this. Okay, just a small bit.
Colonialism and post-colonialism. I mean to say, post-colonialism, no gap between the word post and colonialism, and post-colonialism, hyphen between post, hyphen and colonialism. Is there any hidden meaning between these?
No. If you are in a great hurry, you can forget hyphenation. Absolutely no problem. God will forgive you.
But there has been an article on this, interrogating colonialism.
Quite clear. The European way in the 19th century was to create single national languages. It's going on all over the continent, in Germany, in Italy, and it went on earlier in France and in Britain too, and trying to reduce the number of dialects around. So that I grew up with the idea that you only need to learn one language in the world, and that happens to be English. And I'm really I'm very happy that I was in a way forced to learn German and become bilingual. And by being in Basel then, I get into a country where there are about a dozen, at least if not 20 German dialects, which live in peace with one another. They're mostly not written, but they're used. And I think that this is a very interesting development which perhaps people here should take note of, that dialects can be used in family life and in various kinds of cultural events like our carnivals in Switzerland, and live as the people's comment on the wireless as well, whereas everybody is using the same written language, and the need to speak at least one international language is also there.
The uses of post-colonialism, particularly when we talk about, it's one thing to say that Western criticism has forgotten the collective. It has focused on the individual. Professor Riviere also ended his talk with Eshebe's comment yesterday about the valorization of the universal. But what is this thing called collective? I'm not so sure about it at all. And why are we going back to that collective? It's one thing to say that Vibhuti Bhushan's Patar Panchali, the UNESCO translation into English, cut off the last 75 pages and ended with Obu going to the city, leaving his village behind, looking at the village disappearing from the railway compartment window with great nostalgia. But then the rest of the 75 pages deals with the utter destruction of his family by the city, in the city, by the city. But that's one thing. And maybe the individual stories don't really reflect the collective, and maybe we need to reclaim that collective and go back to that collective. But then again, what is this collective in the context of this great fear that we have, which is the fear of loss? Because we are afraid of this loss of the collective. And I'm not just talking of the nationalist paranoia or the larger paranoias. I'm even talking of the local paranoias, where every community wants to assert itself for particular profit, for particular gains, for political gains. And we are all doing that all the time. So where are we heading? I think this, and somebody referred to the language issue there. The mother tongue is fine. I mean, Dr. Kishore referred to the father tongue also. So there is another alternative there as well, going by the Supreme Court judgment. But then the mother tongue, if Kannada cannot be the mother tongue of everyone in Karnataka. as Professor EVR referred to it yesterday also, there are several other. So aren't we, in our anxiety to reclaim the collective, aren't we being hegemonic in our own turn? Aren't we also guilty of it in our own turn? Is something that's been worrying me a bit.
Could I also ask a question in continuation of what Dr. Abhishek has said? Own language, Konkani. I see a sanitized, church-based version of Konkani, so-called Christian pure version coming out in literature, which is not the dialect that people speak, and that dialect again varies every day, in so many different places. And the kind of ideology that these writers, for example, male-centered writing, that are being making a study of, this again can be highly divisive, is my observation. For instance, how they think of certain categories, caste maybe, or women, gender. So this reclamation of languages also involves regressive practices, is my observation.
Can I sense of presence of the past is in the present. You see, look across the world. A few years back, Australian government had to apologize to the Aboriginals for all the wrongs done to the Aboriginals. In Canada, you see, I saw many novels. One novel about how all Japanese were put in prison during the Second World War. In America, these are histories which we have never actually. So past is not something known. We think we know the past, you see, and that's where we have official past, official history. Increasingly, we are being fed textbook views of the past, and that's where we actually need to go beyond. That's where, you see, when Uroshi Butalia recorded the testimonials of, you see, the women of partition, except the story Lajwandi, we hardly had any account of what happened to women in partition. So there are suppressed, silenced histories. So this past actually is something which is not over there. No, that is where the hegemony operates. Hegemony always operates in the in the interest of silence, in the interest of sanitized past. So what we are being fed, you see, through serials on the television, through a whole lot of other metaphors, you see, there is a very sanitized view. I would actually say culture is always a place of conflict. We should not be afraid of conflict. Debate, you see, is part of any language. It's a chaotic, noisy. If the classroom is silent, I am worried. If a classroom is chaotic, I feel at home. There should be chaotic kind of, you see, Indian bazaar, look at Indian bazaar. We wouldn't like a very, you see, silent, you see, that kind of. So we need to actually have, we should be, how many suppressed histories are there around us, you see? Do we know even our grandparents, their histories? There might be even suppressed histories in the, you see, in one's own family, you see? That's where the subaltern essay, she suddenly mentions this Bhuvaneshwari is somebody who is related to me in my own family. She suddenly says, you see. Modern Christian, you hadn't answered. He had a question about postmodern.
So, Dr. Shashidhar, just a point I wanted to make. I think the British did begin to realize that the Indians had quite a complex tax system, etc., and they began to respect very greatly Indian knowledge. They stopped thinking of us as empty vessels into which they had to pour Western knowledge. I think this has been explored by Ranaji Kuva in his essay, An Indian Historiography of India, where they were going crazy trying to sort out the taxes in India because there was such a complex system already in place.
On the other hand, Geraldine, what happened was a kind of agricultural taxation that existed from the time of Cholas systematically changed by the British. They brought in the right wall system. if you are very important in this province, you are declared as a zamindar, you collect the tax, you pay the tax. This was not the system. Why did the British do it? They did it precisely because India was such a large country. Collecting tax was very difficult.
Yes.
So they changed the tax system so that the locals themselves would collect the tax, retain part of it and hand over the rest. The Jenkins was telling me yesterday what happened in Guntur.
Yes.
They would collect the tax, have 3 different accounts, one for themselves, one for the relatives, and then to submit to the British. This was because of the right policy. And that created a lot of problems. We sometimes think that the landlord system was there always. It's not true. Especially this happens in Dalit writing. They look at the landlord as the primordial symbol of Indian culture. That's not true. The landlords were created by the British. We didn't have the landlord system before. Right? We had a very different kind of a system.
But it was complex and it was brilliant. And they no longer had any doubts about the brilliance of Indians by taxation and land reform.
Not about the tax system, but the British did retain some of the things from the Mughals. Certainly not the taxation system. Not the taxation system.
No, the kind of system that they had in all these in the Bengal province.
Okay, the postmodern question is too big to take now. Basically, postmodernism is an aesthetics. It's an aesthetics. It comes into post-colonialism in this sense that postmodernism celebrates the open-ended text. Post-colonials are interested in this open-ended text so that they can read into it. So postmodernism is generally used as a strategy, as a technique of reading by the post-colonials. And there is a lot of problem there. This problem is addressed a very number of times. They talk of hybridization as a strategy. I'm not personally happy with these things because at this point post-colonialism becomes an end in itself. That's precisely what Professor Ramakrishnan was saying. It becomes a self-sufficient theory, very urbane, university-bred creature. It's like the battery chicken. Has enough weight but no taste at all. Because it is not pepped on worms, you have fed it on something else. I'm not happy about postmodernism because it becomes, postmodernism is basically a European creature. Very, very different sort of a thing, and you bring it over here. I think the culprit here is Homi Bhabha and Spivak. I've never excused them for doing this. There are alternative ways of reading. To say that these are strategic ways of reading the text is to revert post-colonialism to the peg of European theory again. That's a great irony. You talk of post-colonialism in terms of these theories, Western theories. So what is then post-colonialism? It still continues to be the way the white man talks about the East. Only this time he's saying, okay, we did it wrong, that's not it is, it's something else. Is this post-colonialism of the post-colonials, or is this the post-colonials of the Californians? That's when you begin to read, the later writings of Baba and others, you get very suffocated. Theory bristling with theoretical brilliance. I don't know. I'm a common sense, creature. I want some empiricism, some common sense. Too much of generalization is not good to have.
I think as Deepesh questioned Anderson, who's in the community, we should also say who's society.
We will now have a vote of thanks by Dr. Parinita. Just 2 more minutes, and then we will let you free.
What is it?
I said just 2 more minutes and we'll let you free.
Just as it was my privilege to welcome you, it's my privilege to give the vote of thanks.
So
I always
don't
thought
think
the vote of thanks.
We're not hearing.
I always thought that the vote of thanks was an unnecessary appendage to the function. Right, long lists of names were read out and
It's underneath?
am I not audible?
No,
Audible? Yes.
no, you need to start again.
Yes, as I was saying, I always thought that the vote of thanks was an unnecessary appendage to any function where you will read out long lists of name and survive thank yous and words of gratitude. But today I feel it's necessary for me to give a vote of thanks. Yes, because I have so many people to thank. And first of all, I think I should thank the Vice Chancellor for pushing us as a department and as an individual out of that safe, the world that we had kind of inhabited and which we didn't want to go out of. And once we were pushed out, I think it was a good thing that happened. Yes, we learned a lot of things, and I think it was an exciting process, sometimes tense, sometimes worrying, but on the whole, I'm glad that it happened. And we are also glad that Texture Power Solutions gave us the funds, because as a department, I think we are very bad at collecting funds. We are not capable of such kinds of tasks. So
we are not professional beggars.
Yes.
Too much of a theorist, not practical enough.
And then once this happened, once we were pushed out of that boundary, I think the university was very, I would say, very generous and very accommodating. For example, all the university officials, the registrar, the finance officer, the university guest house in charge, Dr. Mallaya, the transportation, our driver Krishna, all of them, readily agreed to all the requests that we made and gave us everything that we needed. And then the invited speakers, when we first listed out the names, I was warned that maybe we should keep some alternatives, because not always all the invited speakers come. But I thought, let me trust them. I did not ask anyone else to stand instead of them, and they did not belie my trust. All of them came, all of them. And we very deliberately chose them because we felt that they would contribute something to us. And they came, and I think they all did a great job, starting with Professor A.V. Ramakrishnan, who I think set out the general contours of the debate, and then constantly intervening into this debate and asking pertinent questions, contributing, giving answers, and then the rest of them followed. And I think it was a great, it pushed us, as I said, a debate, in my welcome speech, I said, a conference like this opens up the boundaries of the classroom, and I think that it did that. The lectures that we heard, the questions that followed, the discussions that followed, I think opened the boundaries of the class. And very often we stand at the brink of our edges of our classroom, not very comfortable with our classes. And now I think that discomfort has increased. Many of the things that they said, many of the things that we discussed, I think increase that discomfort that we have within the academic setting, within the regulations of the classroom, where we can't talk many things and we are, asked to speak certain things in certain ways. And then of course my students. Yes, a big thank you to all of them. Akshita and I think I need to mention them. Akshita and Varsha, who were with me right from the beginning, attending to the certificates, telling me what to do, getting anxious when something didn't happen. All the time they're like my two supports on both sides. And then Nishita and Ravi. If today, I don't know if you're aware, there has been an electricity cut today. We have had no power the whole day, and the person who is responsible for us having this mic and the lights is Ravi. He has been constantly replenishing the diesel in the generator, coming to me every now and then and saying that, ma'am, we need this money to buy more diesel. And he also took the task of cleaning this room, getting people to carry chairs and seeing that everything is in order. And Nishita was, in spite of being very recently married, she has just returned from a honeymoon. And she took the responsibility of seeing that the emceeing is taking place, the instructions are taking place, and everything is taking place smoothly here.
Post-colonial details.
And then we had Zubeda and Sandhya, who took up the job of seeing that food came on time. So if you're well fed, and if you had your tea at regular intervals, and if you like the food, I will be at the time, Zubeda and Sandhya. And finally, Prakash and Nishant, Nishant is my colleague and Prakash is our research student. They were the ones who saw to it that our guests did not have to wait at railway stations or airports, brought them here, ferried them from the guest house to this place, and the logistics of the whole thing was looked after by them. And then my postgraduate students who were allotted certain duties and did them excellently. Yes, thank you very much. I think without your support, this would not have happened. The MC, the helping out in the various tasks. And if I could sit through the whole session listening to the speakers, I think it's because of them. Because they were seeing to it that everything was was being done very smoothly, and I think everything went off smoothly. And a big thank you to you, my students. And then there were, Gopi, who is our attender, and Gopi, who's a typist, and Manjunath, who is our attender. I think they too helped a great deal in organizing this program. Again, in spite of all these grey hairs, I'm the youngest in the department. And my teachers, some of my colleagues are my teachers, they are my seniors, they have much more experience than me in contacting the right people, administration, how to go about it, the protocols, and some of them have more experience in organizing conferences. And whenever I went to them, and whenever we had our meetings, they were always helpful, they gave me suggestions, advice. And without them, again, I don't think I could have organized this conference. And then there were friends from the from outside the department, Dr. Wahida Sultana, Dr. Rajaram Tolpadi, who is here, Dr. Shivram Shetty, all of them helped, and Dr. Rajalakshmi, who was given the responsibility of getting Radhika Santwan. And it was very difficult because of, one is the demonetization. The other is, the books came one by one, and when 4 books came, okay, we can give it to the people in the inaugural function. 5 books, now we have to decide who should we give the 5th one. But ultimately, all 8 books arrived, and I think every day she used to call me and ask, this has not come, I've contacted them, I don't know what to do, shall we change the book? But ultimately everything came, and I thank her for sharing my anxiety with regard to this particular book. And also, Mr. Chandrasekhar and Nitish, who are there constantly there, taking photographs, recording the whole event. Thank you to you. And thank you, and the press. I thank all of them. And thank you, and finally you who participated in this, yes. As I said, yes, Mr. Devendra also, who was always there. He was there, even he was there right from, before the conference began. I've written his name, I missed it. So, yes, thank you very much. And then finally, all of you, who, as I said, came in spite of the fact you are not getting any API scores. And you came here, you listened, you spoke, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right.